Hi, in today's video we're going to take a look at installing Debian Bookworm and Gnome without the bloat. So without all the games and all the extra stuff that you get. We'll also take a look at setting up your keymap, doas, non-free software, backports, setting up the alcritty terminal, installing the latest version of Emacs from the backports, setting up general packages, and adding your SSH key to the Gnome keyring. So what we have here is Debian Bookworm running on a MacBook Pro Retina 2015. And as you can see, I don't have all the bloated extras that you typically get with all the games, the terminals, all that extra stuff. So this is Gnome. And what we have here is Emacs 30. So we've got the latest version of Emacs. We've got the alcritty terminal. So what I'm going to do is actually take you through getting this all set up so that you've got a version of Debian without all the bloat and all the extras that you typically have to remove. So what I'm going to do is actually come across to my notes over here and actually go through the setup. So what we have is a series of steps that we're going to go through to actually get this set up. So let me go through the presentation. So first of all, what you're going to want to do is download the net installer. So typically I use the net installer instead of the live version with the desktop. So you can just use wget with the -c option or continue, so that if the download gets interrupted, you can actually resume it. I'll put links to all this so you can actually go through the steps in the documentation. So we download the ISO, and then what we're going to do is actually we're not going to DD the image. What we first need to do is plug in the USB drive and then run lsblk. And what you'll see is you'll get an output similar to this. And what the important thing to do is actually find the correct drive that you want to copy the image to. So in my case, it was actually SDA, it was dev SDA. If I scroll down here, what you'll actually see is normally what you would do is you would DD the ISO onto the USB drive, but Debian has a ISO format called a hybrid image that actually allows you just to copy the ISO onto the USB device. So first of all, it's not typically necessary, but just make sure the dev SDA or whatever the thumb drive is unmounted. And then what we're going to do is simply copy the Debian 12 ISO onto the USB drive with sudo cp, the path to the ISO, and then dev SDA, and replace dev SDA with your drive. And then after we've done that, what we do is we run sudo sync to make sure everything's synced up. So after that step, what we do is we plug in the USB drive, turn on the computer, and on the Mac, what you need to do is press Alt and then select the EFI partition, which is typically the last partition on the right. If you're using another computer, it's typically something like F12 or F2, and you usually have to go into your BIOS and select the USB drive to be booted before the internal drive. So after that, what we're going to do is these are just some rough notes on the steps in the installer. So when you get to the partition step, typically what I like to do is actually create a separate home partition. Okay, now this is the important part. When you get to the section of the installer that says software selection, what you'll find is it's actually pre-filled in with Debian desktop environment, Gnome, and standard system utilities. And the issue with this is the Gnome selection is actually a meta port that installs the entire Gnome application suite. So what you will find is it will actually install a really bloated version of Gnome with about 20 versions of games, scanners, a TIE terminal, and all these different things. And it's actually a real pain to remove them because a lot of the names of the applications aren't actually the names of the applications listed aren't actually the names you need to use to uninstall them. So, for instance, the TIE terminal is called something like xterm TIE terminal or something. So it's a bit of a pain to actually uninstall them. So what you want to do is on the software selection screen, you use space to deselect. And what you want to do is actually deselect Debian desktop environment and Gnome, but leave the standard system utilities selected. So on the software selection screen, just make sure that you unselect Debian desktop environment and Gnome, but leave the standard system utilities selected, and then press continue. After that, what you want to do is actually switch to root because sudo isn't actually installed yet. So we run su dash and then apt update apt install gnome core and then reboot. And what this does is it actually installs a very slimmed down version of Gnome without all the bloated extras that you typically get, including the games and all the other stuff. So the next step is, once you've actually booted into Gnome, is to set your keyboard keymap. I think in the net installer, it doesn't actually have an option to check your keyboard and stuff. So what we want to do is in the, let me switch across here, settings, keyboard, basically add your, under the input source, add your keyboard. So typically I use an English UK Mac layout. Then the next step, hang on if I get the keys right. Right. So what you can do is actually install GNOME tweaks so that you can actually set custom keyboard options. And what I do is actually use XKB to switch some keys. And I'll put a link to my XKB settings so that I can basically swap the Alt, Super, and Control keys. So what you can do is install GNOME tweaks, and what you can do is actually create this directory .config xkb with all these subdirectories here. Config xkb, systems, rules, compact, key codes, types. And if I come across to Debian files xkb. Okay. So in the Git repository here, you can see this has only got two directories, rules and symbols, because all the other directories that we created, compact, key codes, and types, are actually empty. So what I have in here, I have rules and symbols, and we have evdev and evdev.xml. And what I have here is a custom XKB setup to actually swap Alt, Win, and Control. So what you can see here in the XML file is this is what's actually going to show up in Gnome tweaks that you can actually select as an option. So what we have down here is control is mapped to alt, alt to win, and win to the control key. So what I have is the far left is alt, followed by super, and then followed by control, because typically what happens is you have a bit of a messed up sort of setup, so that control is the super key, and then you have the super key is control, and then alt, which is a bit of a pain to actually get your fingers around when you're doing a copy and paste. And then what we have in here is symbols, custom, and GB. And so what you'll see here is control is mapped to alt, alt to win, and win to the control key. And this is the XKB setup. So we have super L, control L, alt meta. And also the other issue that I found is I needed to actually switch the number sign and sterling, because what was actually happening was typically when you press shift and 3, you want the hash, you want the pound symbol. Yeah. And what happens is a lot of the time it's actually switched. So this actually switches the shift S3 combination back to outputting the hash. Oh, bugger. Didn't mean to do that. Hang on, let me get that back. All right, is it? All right. Okay, so by hash I meant the pound symbol there. Right. Okay, so we got that. Let's shift across to the next thing. The next important thing is actually setting the console keymap. Now, this is really important, because what can happen is you can set the keymap on the desktop to use, UK Mac or whatever, but it's not going to be respected in the console. And by that I mean when you actually log in and you're presented with a console to actually enter your password to decrypt the drive using Lux, it's not actually going to be using the keymap that you set on the desktop. So what you need to do is actually set the console keymap to the same settings that you've actually set on the desktop. And the way you do that is actually by switching to root. So when you're in the desktop, what you do is run su dash, and that puts you at root. You enter the root password. And then what you want to do is edit the keyboard file, which is etc default keyboard. And what you'll see here is the XKB layout and the XKB variant. So what we have is GB and Mac, and that is going to correspond to this UK, English UK Macintosh. So edit the keyboard file, set the XKB layout and the XKB variant to the same settings that you've set in the settings GUI. And then what you need to do is update init ram fs. So while you're still as root, you run update dash init ram fs dash u. That's going to build a new init ram. And then after that, what you do is you'll reboot, and the console keymap will be set to the same input source that you've actually set on the desktop. And that's really important because, as I said, a lot of the time the keys can actually be switched depending on what XKB settings you have. Things like shift 2 normally outputs the @ sign, whereas sometimes it will actually output double quotes, and that's can be really confusing if you've used a double quote or an @ sign in your password, because then you have to use a different key and it's really irritating. So that's how you set the keymap up. When you actually go through the installer, what I found is non-free firmware is actually now enabled in the Debian ISO. But what happens is you'll actually get a message during the install, especially on a MacBook Pro, where it'll actually say, you've got this missing firmware, do you want to load it from a USB drive? So what you used to have to do is actually download the firmware and actually install it when you're going through the installer, but that's no longer necessary. It will actually output these missing things. This is the actual firmware that would actually be you'd need to install. But the strange thing is, it will give you this message, but it will actually be installed. So if it's not, what you can actually do is switch to root and run apt install firmware -brcm80211, and that's basically for the Broadcom Wi-Fi chip. So this is a bit confusing. It will say you've got missing firmware and do you want to install it. So what I did was just go no, continue, and when I actually booted up into the desktop environment, the Wi-Fi chip was actually working and it was actually installed. So typically you can actually ignore the missing firmware option. So that's just another issue that I came across. So what we're going to do now is actually install doas, which is an alternative to sudo. So what we're going to do is actually switch to root, su-, and then apt install doas. And what we're going to do is create this file, etc.doas.conf. And what we have here, this little section, is allow user, so permit, keep environment, set environment, path, and then your username. And then these sections are important. Allow root to switch to our user. So permit no pass, keep environment, set environment, path, root as your username. Then what we have here is no pass, permit no pass, keep environment, set environment, path, username. And what this allows you to do is run any command with doas without being prompted for a password. What you can actually do is you can actually set specific commands that you want to run without a password. So there's a way to specify things like apt. So you can just run doas apt upgrade, doas apt update, and not be prompted for a password. But what I've done is just set it so that I can just run any command with doas without being prompted for a password. And the important one down here is root as root. And what this is permit no pass, keep environment, set environment, path, root as root. This allows you actually to, it makes sure that things that need elevated permissions actually run as root. And the important thing about this is the order of these commands. You have to keep these in a specific order, and you want this one at the bottom. So I'll put links to all of this as well, and let's switch on to the next section. So this is how you install ZSH. So doas apt install ZSH syntax highlighting, and then what we want to do is actually change our shell as our regular user, not as root. So this command here is run as your regular user. So chsh-s user bin zsh, and then you'll be prompted for your admin password. And what you need to do is actually log out and log back in for it to actually take effect and change the shell. So next step is actually installing alcritty, and the version of alcritty that ships with Debian Bookworm is actually an older version that uses the YAML syntax as opposed to the new version of alcritty which uses toml. So what you do is run doas apt install alcritty, and then create the alcritty directory, make directory -p ~/.config alcritty, and then you can copy the default alcritty YAML into that directory. And this is the location, so that should actually have this section here. So cp user share doc alcritty examples alcritty.yaml to config alcritty, and let me just show you what the difference is. So okay, all right, here we go. So this is the alcritty terminal settings using the YAML, and the new version actually uses toml. Let me just come across and show you the difference. Okay, so this is the toml configuration for alcritty, which is much better, but it's only available in the newer versions of alcritty, which aren't available on Debian Bookworm. So the difference is the YAML version has to be indented properly. Otherwise, what will happen is you will get errors with the config file. So what we have up here is the environment. We set the term. We can set window padding. Now, the other thing that I want to mention is there's actually a bug with alcritty and Gnome, the versions used on Debian Bookworm. Let's get some more tea. So with alcritty, what you can actually do is you can hide the title bar. So what you can see here is I have no title bar. Okay, but unfortunately, if you do that with, if you set that option, you can set decoration full. And what that does is that includes the title bar. You set decoration none, that excludes the title bar. But then what happens is if you try and set it to be maximized, set the window to be maximized, it has this weird bug where it will actually set the window to be maximized but only the width and not the height, which is really irritating. So what you want to do is actually make sure that you have decorations full, and this isn't an issue on later versions of alcritty and Gnome, but it is a bug on Debian Bookworm with the versions of Gnome and alcritty that ship with that. So then what we can do is we can actually set the opacity. So as you can see here, this is 90% opacity. This is NixOS running the latest version of alcritty and Gnome, but the setting works on the older version as well. So opacity 90%, title, class. You can set the theme variant to dark, the font. So I'm setting that to Fira code, and these are the colors. So let me just switch back to this and show you. Okay, you have a machine. Okay, so this is Debian Bookworm, and what you can see here is we've got alcritty set up with the title bar here, and also Emacs. Okay, and that is to get around the bug. Okay, let me just switch back there. So what you can see here is on NixOS, I don't have the title bar for either alcritty or Emacs, but the issue is, so there's a bug that affects applications set without a title bar. What will happen is typically in the overview, they won't actually appear. So when the overview, when you do that, what will happen is if you don't have a title bar set in an application, it doesn't actually show up in the overview for some reason. So when you're switching between screens using the overview, the application doesn't actually show up, which is really irritating. So that's just another issue. And this is how I set the colors. So this is the color scheme that I'm actually using there. And at the bottom, what we have is live config reload. And that basically means that when you're editing the alcritty config, the settings take effect straight away. So that's the old YAML config, and this is the new POML config that I'm actually using on this machine. And you can see it's much cleaner, and you don't have the issue with the indentation. So that's an issue with the alcritty YML file, YAML file on Debian Bookworm. Okay, let's switch across here. So what we're going to be taking a look at is installing, setting up backports and non-free software. So the reason why you want to use backports is because this will allow you to install some applications that are newer than are available in the default repository. And the only application that I'm actually using backports for is Emacs, so that I can install Emacs 30. What we also want to do is actually enable non-free software, and this is essential so that you can install a particular package called the Intel. I'll get to it in the next section, but basically there's a package that enables VAPI, and we'll get to that in a second. So what we want to do is edit the etc apt sources.list, and what you want to do is for each of these lines, they'll start off with this going non-free firmware. What you want to do is add non-free to the end, as you can see here. So we've got the Debian Bookworm main, security, and updates. And what you want to do as well is actually enable the backports with this section here. So Bookworm backports main non-free firmware, non-free, and source non-free firmware and non-free. Save that and do a doas apt update. So again, these are the default sections 1, 2, 3. So for these ones, what you want to do is just append non-free to each of these 6 lines, and then enable these, add these 2 extra lines here for backports, right? And do an apt update. Okay, so this is how we can install the latest version of Emacs on Debian Bookworm. So the trick is, what you need to do is use this extra flag -t bookworm backports. So when we search, let me see if I can get this search Emacs. I'm just going to do this on the other machine. Just might help if I spelled it right. Let me just check this. Right. Yeah, it's not listing it actually because I've got backports enabled. But what you do is typically if you were just to search for app search Emacs, you'd find it as like version 28 or 29, I think. I think it's 28. But what you do is you run app search Emacs -pgtk, and this is the pure GTK version that is built for Wayland. And you use the -t flag with Bookworm backports, and this allows you to search for applications in the Bookworm backports repository. And then to install Emacs, what we do is we run doas apt install Emacs -pgtk -t Bookworm backports, and that's going to install the latest version of Emacs using the backports repository. So we'll actually get version 30 of Emacs as opposed to version 28. Okay, Fira code. So this is my notes on the fonts. So I wanted to install Fira code fonts. So doas apt install fonts -Fira code. And I can't pronounce this. But this is a font that I use, the iOS. Got it. But this is a font I use, and it wasn't available in the Debian repository. So basically, I just download it, unzip it, and there's actually two places where you can put fonts. You can put fonts in .fonts in your home directory, but there is also a .local share fonts directory that you can use, which just keeps things a bit cleaner. So if you want to install custom fonts, install them in .local share fonts. After you've done that, you need to update the font cache with fc-cache-fv. Okay. General packages. Right. Okay. This is the one I was on about. So this is a list of the packages I've installed, and this is the one I wanted to mention. Intel Media VA driver non-free. By default, what will happen is when you set up your machine, it's actually going to install Intel Media VA driver, which is for VAPI. And this is used with OBS Studio. So when you actually set up OBS Studio, there's a wizard that you run through, and it will check what it can actually record at. It will actually run a check to see how much sort of power you've got to run something. Now with the Intel Media VA driver, typically what will happen is you'll only actually be able to record as something like 840 by 480 or 840 by 460, I forget offhand, but it's not 1920 by 1080. Okay, so with the default driver, what will happen is when you're trying to record with OBS Studio on Debian Bookworm, it will actually not be able to record with the full size of your screen. Let me see if I can actually bring this up on the other machine. Okay, right, let me see if I can do this. See if it'll let me bring up the settings while I'm streaming. Right, okay. Let me just switch back across. What I'm actually doing is I'm streaming using SRT from one machine running OBS Studio to another. So if I come across here, what you see is this is Debian Bookworm running OBS Studio streaming to the second machine. And this is the output. And what you will see here is I have the Intel Media VA driver non-free version installed. And what you'll see listed here is the encoder set to FFmpeg VAPI, and the output is 1920 by 1080. And you'll see it's actually listing the VAPI device, the profile, all that kind of stuff. So I'll close that. Switch back. So as I said, what happens with the standard Intel Media VA driver is you won't be able to record or stream at 1920 by 1080. So what you actually want to do is install the Intel Media VA driver -non-free, and that will replace the existing driver, and that will allow you to actually record at 1920 by 1080 with OBS Studio. So that's really important. So this is a list of all the applications I've got installed. We've got ABook, RA2C, Build Essential, that's for building software, install things like GCC, that sort of stuff. We've got Chromium, curl, dconf editor, ffmpeg, fdfind, that's the Rust version of find, which is faster. Got Git Gnome tweaks, GUFW, that's for the graphical interface to the firewall. Handbrake, ImageMagick, Kodi. You also want the Kodi input stream adaptive, and that allows you to use Kodi to play things that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. libnotify bin is for the notify send command, so that you can actually have scripts that output notifications. We've got libsocks, format all, MPD, MPC with music player daemon, MPV. You also want to install MPV-empress, and what this does is this allows you to use keyboard shortcuts to actually pause MPV. You can also use player CTL to interact with MPV to pause, play, you know, all that kind of stuff. NC-MPC is an interface for MPD. OAuth tool is for generating two-factor passwords. OBS Studio, OpenVPN, Pandoc, Pin2 recurses. That is a interface to use with things like SSH and GPG. Got Player CTL, which, as I said, allows you to play and pause stuff on the command line that have Empress support, including Firefox, Chromium, MPV with the MPV Empress package. We've got ripgrep. Now, the other thing you want to install is Seahorse, and that is the passwords application which stores your SSH and GPG password, because that's not installed by default with the Gnome core package. We've got socks. We've got SRT tools, and that is for SRT streaming with FFmpeg. Task spooler, and that is to queue up commands to be executed sequentially one after another. Tmux, transmission GTK, rsync, and finally WL-clipboard, and that is a clipboard for Wayland. So let's come across the next section. So what you want to do is also set up your SSH keys so that they work with the Gnome keyring. So what we want to do is set up, we install the Seahorse package, and what we want to be able to do is actually set our SSH keys up so that when we enter them, they're saved into the keyring, so that we don't actually have to add them each time we boot in. And the way that you do this, on the ZSH shell, what we need to do is edit our ZSH env file. And what we do is add this line here, eval. You can see this $sign and the code here. And what this does is this kind of runs a subshell. We have user bin, Gnome keyring, daemon, start, components, GPG, secrets, SSH. Right. once we've done that, you need to source the ZSH env, and then what you do is you run ssh-add, and then the path to your SSH configuration file. It's not your configuration file, it's the actual private key, the ID underscore RSA. And what will happen is you'll actually be you'll get a GUI prompt which will actually allow which has an option you can select to check to save the password to the keyring. Now the annoying thing about this GUI prompt is it actually comes up and it has focus, and it doesn't allow you to switch to anything else to copy text or anything. So what you need to do is actually copy your SSH password before this SSH add step. So what you do is you copy your SSH password to the clipboard, then run ssh-add in the path to your ID underscore RSA file. You'll get this GUI prompt that comes up where you can then paste in the key, the password, and you check the little box that says save to keyring. That is then going to save your SSH password to the keyring, so that every time you log in, it will automatically be enabled, so that you don't have to add it every time, which is a big time saver. So those are the steps. Let me just switch back to Gnome over here. Wrong button. Start streaming. Come across here. Okay. So again, here's alcritty. As you can see, we got the toolbar set up here. We've got the opacity. We got Emacs here. Can I show the version? Emacs version. Yeah, you can see Emacs 30. Okay, there's OBS Studio. Okay, you can see down here we've got none of the bloat that you would typically get. So password and keys, that is Seahorse. These are some of the options that will come pre-installed. There's Gnome tweaks so that you can actually come across here. So if I come across to keyboard and mouse, right. Yeah, it's the some of these applications look different from the newer ones, but this is basically where you can set stuff like how focus works. Oh, that's another thing that I should actually mention. Right, okay. Notify, send, test. Okay, and you'll see I'm getting the notification coming up in Emacs here. Typically what happens is when you get desktop notifications, they will come up listed in the notification section here. What you can actually do is you can actually disable Gnome notifications and actually use another notification server. What I'm using is EDNC in Emacs, and this is the Emacs Desktop Notification Center, so that I actually get notifications coming up in Emacs as opposed to coming up in here. And the issue with the Gnome notifications is a lot of the time is they're sort of truncated, and if you dismiss them, you can't get them back. So what you can actually do, if I come across here, auto start. What I have here is in config auto start, I have this desktop entry. You can see desktop entry, type application, exec. So this is what's actually going to be executed. So home, username, bin, and I've got a script called no gnome underscore notifications, hidden true, no display, true. Gnome auto start enable true. Name and comment. So if I come across to this script, no notifications. Very simple script, just one line down here. keykill-f, and then in single quotes, org gnome .shell notifications. And what that does is every time I log in, it runs the auto start command, which executes this script, and that kills the org gnome notification so that I can actually use another notification server instead of the one built into Gnome. Because as I said, I just really don't like it. It sort of comes up in here, and I think later versions of Gnome have it set so that you can actually expand the notifications. But the issue is when you kind of like sort of dismiss them, you can't actually see them again. Whereas if I come across here, test 2, test 3, so you can see here notification 2, 3, EDNC log, and what you'll see here is actually a list of all of the notifications. So with the Emacs EDNC package, what you actually have is a log of all of the notifications, and this also works with notifications from your browser. So for instance, YouTube comments, what happens is I'll get a notification coming up in Emacs, so I can actually see the comment, and also there is a translate shell command, but it's not available on Debian. But if I get a notification on my other system, I can actually translate the notification from another language into English inside Emacs. So let me just stop that now. Switch back to over here. Okay. Right. So that's getting Emacs set up. So as I said, let me just turn the all tree slide mode off. So quick recap. I'll put a link to this. You download the ISO. You copy the ISO to the thumb drive, making sure it's the correct one. And then you run sudo sync. You boot from the USB drive. And it said on Macs you need to press Alt and then select the EFI partition, which typically the furthest right drive listed. It's got a different color from the built-in drive. In the partition section, I like to create a separate home partition. Now this is the important bit to remember, the software selection. Press space to deselect Debian desktop environment and Gnome, and just leave the standard system utilities selected, and then press continue. Then what you need to do is actually switch to root because sudo isn't installed yet, and we do that with su- apt update, apt install gnome core, reboot, set your keymap. And remember, to set the keymap for the console, what you do is edit, accept your default keyboard, and set the XKB layout variant, and the XKB layout and the XKB variant to match what you've actually set in the desktop settings, and then update init RAM-fs. You can ignore the missing firmware option because, as I said, if I just switch back here, no, I won't do that actually. But it'll actually come up with your the Wi-Fi working. It'll actually come up with the available networks you can choose. doas. So this is how we set up doas. ZSH backport. So we've got non-free enabled there. And backports. This is how you actually install things from backports using the -t bookworm -backports option. And general packages and setting up SSH to add your key to the Gnome keyring. So that's just some notes on getting Debian set up. And the other important one that you're going to want to do is the Intel Media VA driver non-free option, and that's especially useful for OBS Studio to allow you to record at 1920 by 1080. I hope those tips help, and I'll put links to all this under the video.